My wife cheated on me with my brother and tried to come back. I used to think distance was the cleanest kind of safety, not because I hated my family, but because I learned early that arguing with them only made me smaller. In our house, there was always one star, and it was never me. My brother could breathe, and they would call it talent. I could bring home a top grade, and they would say I got lucky. If I talked about building something of my own, my father would smirk like he already knew how it ended. My mother would sigh and tell me to be realistic, and my brother would sit there quiet and pleased, not cruel exactly, just comfortable being the one they chose. After a while, I stopped defending myself. I stopped explaining. I stopped asking for approval I was never going to receive. I put my head down and built a different life. I worked jobs that left my hands raw and my mind exhausted. I studied at night when my friends slept. I made mistakes that cost me money I did not have. I started a business in a cramped room with a second-hand desk and a cheap laptop that overheated. The first months were humiliating. The kind of humiliation nobody sees when they only notice you after you win. But I kept going because I had no other option that felt like dignity. Slowly the numbers changed. Clients returned. Referrals came in. Contracts got bigger. And one day I realized I had built something that could not be dismissed with a laugh. That was when my phone started buzzing with familiar names. My mother called with a sweetness that felt practiced. My father asked questions about my company like he had been curious for years, and my brother suddenly had time for me. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt cautious, because nothing about my childhood taught me to trust their new interest. I kept the call short. I stayed polite. I did not reopen old arguments. I told myself I could forgive without forgetting. Then I met my wife, and for the first time my life was not just work and stubbornness. She had a calm way of speaking that made chaos feel silly. She listened to me like my thoughts mattered. She laughed easily, and she made our home feel like a place where my guard could drop. We got married, and I believed we had built something unbreakable. Not perfect, just steady. The kind of steady I always wanted. For a while things were simple. Mornings with coffee, evenings with plans, weekends where we stayed in and watched movies and talked about the future. Then the visits started. At first it was my parents, dropping by with food and small gifts like they were trying to rewrite history with kindness. I let it happen because part of me wanted to believe people could change. And then my brother began showing up more often than felt normal. Always smiling, always friendly, always a little too curious. He would compliment my house, ask about my business, ask about my schedule, and then shift his attention to my wife in a way that made the room feel tighter. In the beginning, she stayed polite, but distant. She would excuse herself to the kitchen. She would check on laundry that did not need checking. She would stand by the doorway like she had somewhere else to be. I noticed those details because I noticed patterns for a living, and the pattern told me she was uncomfortable. That should have been the end of it. But my brother kept coming, sometimes with my parents, sometimes alone, sometimes with a reason that made sense, sometimes with no reason at all, and slowly the pattern changed. She stopped leaving the room. She started laughing at his jokes even when they were not funny. She started telling stories from her day to him before she told them to me. And when I raised my eyebrows, she would smile and say I was imagining things. I wanted to believe her. I did not want to be the kind of husband who turns normal friendliness into suspicion, but my instincts did not quiet down. They got louder, because other things began to shift too. My wife became protective of her phone, not in a dramatic way, just in small, careful movements. The screen turned down when I walked by. Notifications cleared fast, a new passcode that she explained away as a security habit, and my brother began asking oddly specific questions. What time do you leave tomorrow? Are you in the office all day? Do you still go to that late meeting on Thursdays? Questions that sounded casual, but landed like probes. I told myself to relax. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was letting old family wounds poison my view. But one night, I came home early. Not because I suspected anything, because a meeting got canceled and I wanted to surprise my wife with dinner. I walked into the house and felt something I cannot explain with logic. The air was wrong, like a room after an argument. I heard movement upstairs and then silence. And in that silence, my mind did what it always does when something is off. It connected dots, too fast, too sharply. I did not run upstairs. I did not shout her name. I stood still and listened. A door clicked. Footsteps moved lightly. And then my brother's voice floated down the stairs. Casual, cheerful, like he had every right to be there. He called my name like this was normal, like he had been invited. My wife followed a moment later. Her smile was quick and thin. She said, "You were home early." And my brother added, "Yeah, we were just talking." That word just landed hard, because I had heard it before in 1,000 situations where people hide the real story behind a small harmless word. I looked at them both, and I saw it. Not proof, not a confession, but a crack in the picture. A faint panic that they tried to cover with friendliness. I nodded. I kept my face calm. I asked nothing. I said nothing that could not be taken back, because in my world reactions are expensive, and the people who keep their head win. I went to the kitchen. I opened the fridge. I pretended to think about dinner, and all the while my heart was pounding like it wanted to warn me. I realized in that moment that whatever was happening had been happening for a while, and if I moved too fast I would only catch shadows. So I made a decision that surprised even me. I would not confront them yet. I would not accuse without a plan. I would gather the truth quietly, not for revenge, for survival. Because when family turns into a threat, you do not win by yelling. You win by being prepared. And as I stood there with my hand on the fridge door, I understood something that made my stomach drop. The reason my parents had returned might not be love at all. It might be timing. It might be opportunity. It might be that they were not coming closer to me. They were coming closer to what I built, and my brother was standing right in the middle of it with a smile that suddenly felt familiar. The same smile he wore when we were kids, and he knew the attention was his. And that night, I went to bed beside my wife and stared into the dark, listening to her breathing, wondering when my home stopped being safe, and how long the people closest to me had been practicing their lies. The next days I became quieter than usual, and that alone should have worried her. But she was distracted by something else. I could see it in the way she checked the door when my phone buzzed, and in the way she asked casual questions about my plans for the week. I answered honestly because lies were unnecessary. My schedule was real and predictable, and that made it easier for others to plan around it. I did not follow her or search her phone or demand explanations. Instead, I did what I always did when a deal felt unstable. I stepped back and observed. I replayed recent weeks in my head like footage from a security camera, my brother suggesting he drop by when I was busy, my parents encouraging family dinners on days I usually worked late, my wife suddenly interested in whether my business meetings were flexible. All of it formed a picture I did not want, but could no longer ignore. The realization hurt less than I expected because it felt inevitable, like reaching the final page of a book you already understood. Still, I needed certainty, not to punish, but to protect myself. I called my lawyer the next morning and asked for a meeting without giving details. He knew me well enough not to push. When I sat in his office later that day, I spoke slowly and carefully. I told him I suspected betrayal within my marriage involving someone close. I did not name my brother yet, because saying it out loud felt heavier than thinking it. He listened without judgment and asked practical questions: what assets were shared, how the business was structured, whose name was on the house. Had I documented anything? I answered truthfully and realized something important. I had unknowingly protected myself years ago by keeping my work separate from my personal life. The company was mine alone, built before marriage and legally isolated. The house was more complicated but not impossible. My lawyer explained options calmly: separation agreements, documentation strategies, timing. He emphasized patience and discretion. Do not confront until you are ready. Emotions make people careless. Preparation keeps you standing. I left his office feeling steadier, not relieved but grounded. That night my brother came over again. Unannounced, of course. My parents were not with him this time, which made it worse. He acted relaxed, leaned against the counter, talked about old memories that never felt shared when we lived them. My wife joined him easily. They stood closer than necessary. Their conversation flowed without pauses now. I watched them like a stranger in my own home, noticing how they mirrored each other's expressions, how silence between them felt practiced. At one point, my brother asked if I would be away the following weekend. I said maybe, and he smiled in a way that confirmed everything. Later, after he left, my wife asked why I seemed distant. Her tone was careful, almost rehearsed. I told her I was tired. She nodded too quickly. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was angry, but because my mind was busy planning. Over the next weeks, I followed my lawyer's guidance precisely. I documented dates and behaviors without dramatizing them. I adjusted schedules quietly. I secured copies of important records. I stopped sharing details about my work trips. The truth surfaced on its own sooner than expected. One afternoon, I returned home early again, and this time I did not stop at the kitchen. Voices drifted from the living room, low and urgent, my name spoken in a way that was not affectionate. When I stepped into view, they froze. No dramatic reaction, no shouting, just silence, the kind that answers every question at once. My brother tried to speak first and stopped. My wife stared at the floor, and in that moment something inside me closed. Not my heart, but my expectations. I did not ask why or how long. Those answers would not change the outcome. I told my brother to leave, and he did, quickly, without argument. My wife followed him to the door with her eyes like she wanted him to stay. Then she turned back to me and tried to explain, not deny but justify, words about confusion and closeness and feeling understood. I listened without interrupting and then said only one thing. This conversation is over. Tomorrow my lawyer will handle what comes next. She cried then, not loudly, just enough to sound convincing, but it no longer moved me because I was already somewhere else mentally, somewhere practical, somewhere safe. The following days were controlled and quiet. Paperwork replaced conversations. The house felt empty even when she was still there. My lawyer moved efficiently. The structure of my assets held firm. The business remained untouched. The house leaned in my favor. When the agreements were finalized, she looked shocked, not because she lost me, but because she lost access to what she assumed was shared. She said it was unfair. I said nothing, because fairness had left this story long before honesty did. When she moved out, I did not watch her go. I sat in my office and worked. And for the first time in weeks, I felt clear, not happy, but unburdened. And that was enough to keep going. After the papers were signed, my life became unusually quiet. Not peaceful yet, but controlled. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm when you are still checking for damage. My wife was gone. My brother stopped contacting me completely, and my parents went silent for a few weeks as if they were deciding which side of history they wanted to stand on. I threw myself into work not to escape, but to rebuild momentum. The business expanded faster than before because distraction was gone. Decisions became sharper, risks became calculated again. I traveled more, opened new partnerships, hired people I trusted, and slowly my days stopped revolving around what I lost and started focusing on what I was creating. I changed my number and limited who had it. I moved meetings to different locations. I learned again how to enjoy evenings alone without questioning every sound in the house. Months passed, and the silence from my family finally broke. My mother called first, her voice trembling with concern that sounded almost sincere. She asked how I was holding up, said everyone makes mistakes, said family should heal together. I listened quietly until she mentioned that my brother and my ex-wife were struggling financially, that things had not worked out the way they expected, that support would mean a lot right now. I ended the call without raising my voice. A few days later, my father called with a firmer tone. He spoke about responsibility and forgiveness, about blood being thicker than disappointment, and then repeated the same request: help them get back on their feet. I felt something twist in my chest, not anger but disbelief, as if they truly did not understand what they were asking. I told him no, clearly and calmly. The calls increased after that, messages from relatives I barely knew, reminders of shared childhood, stories framed to make me look heartless. Each one was easier to ignore than the last, because clarity has a way of hardening resolve. One evening, my brother tried calling from a different number. I recognized his voice immediately. He sounded tired and smaller than I remembered. He said he wanted to explain, said things happened too fast, said he never meant to hurt me. I stopped him before he could continue. I told him explanations were irrelevant now. Trust once broken does not negotiate its return. He accused me of being cold, of choosing money over family. And that was the moment I understood something important. They never saw the betrayal as the problem. They saw the consequences as unfair. I hung up and blocked the number. The following week, my parents showed up at my office unannounced. Security called me before letting them in. I told them to wait. When I finally met them, I felt like I was meeting strangers. My mother cried. My father demanded answers. They asked how I could abandon my own blood. I told them calmly that I did not abandon anyone. I simply stopped carrying the weight of other people's choices. When they continued pushing, I warned them that further contact would be handled legally. The word legal changed the room instantly. They left without another word. After that, everything stopped. No calls, no visits, no messages. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. I felt free, not because I won or because they lost, but because I finally accepted that some people only value you when they can use what you built. As the business grew and my name became more visible, I no longer wondered who would return next. I already knew, and I was ready not to open the door. With my family gone from my daily life, my routine stabilized in a way I had never experienced before. Mornings were predictable, decisions were mine alone, and the noise that once followed every success finally disappeared. I expanded into new markets quietly, bought out smaller competitors who never saw it coming, and reinvested everything with patience, not arrogance. Success this time felt different because it was not fueled by the need to prove anyone wrong. It was simply the result of focus. Months turned into a year, and my name began appearing in places my family would have noticed. Before, interviews, invitations, industry events, I declined most of them because visibility attracts attention, and attention attracts people with old memories and new expectations. Eventually, curiosity got the better of them. My parents tried again, this time through a lawyer. The message was careful and formal, requesting a conversation about reconciliation and mutual support. I did not respond, not out of spite, but because reconciliation without accountability is just repetition. Around that time, I learned through mutual contacts that my brother and my ex-wife were no longer together. The partnership that cost me my family had not survived reality. They blamed each other publicly, quietly blamed me privately, and struggled to maintain the lifestyle they once believed was guaranteed. That knowledge brought no satisfaction, only confirmation. One evening, I ran into my ex-wife unexpectedly at a public event. She looked surprised but composed. We exchanged polite greetings like acquaintances who once shared a long story but agreed not to reopen it. She hinted at regret without saying the word, mentioned how different things turned out, how hard life became without support. I wished her well sincerely and walked away before the conversation could become something else. Later that night, I realized how far I had come. There was no anger left, no desire to explain my side. Because closure does not come from final conversations, it comes from indifference shortly after. That I made a decision that surprised even my closest associates. I moved, not because I had to, but because I wanted a clean chapter, a place without echoes. The new house was quieter, farther from old paths, and felt like mine in a way the previous one never fully did. As I unpacked the last box, I understood something clearly. The betrayal did not end my life. It refined it. It removed distractions I once mistook for obligations. And as I stood there alone in that quiet space, I knew the hardest part was not losing my family. It was accepting that I never truly had them. And that realization was not tragic. It was liberating. Time passed differently after that. Not slower or faster, just cleaner. Each week had purpose, and each decision felt deliberate. I surrounded myself with people who respected boundaries and valued consistency. Partners who showed up when they said they would. Employees who spoke honestly even when the truth was uncomfortable. The company grew into something larger than I ever planned. Not because I chased scale, but because stability attracts opportunity. Occasionally, news from my past reached me through distant channels. My parents had moved closer to my brother, hoping to support him. They spoke of me rarely, and when they did, my name carried a mix of resentment and pride, a strange combination that no longer concerned me. My brother attempted once more to reach out through a mutual acquaintance, sending a message that said he missed what we used to have. I never replied because nostalgia is not the same as accountability. One evening, I sat alone reviewing old files and came across early documents from the first year of my business. Rough plans, handwritten notes, sleepless nights preserved in margins, and I realized something important. Everything I had built was done without their belief, without their help, and sometimes despite their doubt. The betrayal hurt, but it also confirmed a truth I had avoided for years. I did not owe anyone access to the life I created. Loyalty is not inherited, it is earned. Later that year, I started mentoring young founders quietly, not publicly, not for recognition. I saw pieces of myself in their uncertainty and ambition, and I made sure to offer something I never received: respect without conditions, belief without comparison. It grounded me in a way success alone never could. During one session, a question came up that stayed with me. How do you know when to forgive? I answered honestly. Forgiveness is not about reopening doors. It is about closing them without carrying the weight. That night, I thought about my family not with bitterness, but with clarity. Some bonds are lessons, not lifelines, and accepting that allows you to move forward without dragging the past behind you. As I looked ahead, I felt something rare and steady, not happiness tied to circumstances, but confidence rooted in self-respect. And for the first time, I knew that no matter who tried to return later, I would not confuse familiarity with trust again. Years later, people often asked me what moment changed everything, and they expected a dramatic answer, a confrontation, or a final argument. But the truth was quieter than that. The real change happened when I stopped waiting for people to understand me. My life settled into a rhythm that felt honest. The company reached a level where I could step back without fear. Systems replaced constant supervision. Trust replaced control. I took time to travel alone, not to escape, but to reflect. New places have a way of showing you who you are when no one knows your name. During one of those trips, I received an unexpected message, not from my brother or my parents, but from someone who once worked closely with my ex-wife. The message was short and careful, saying only that my parents were struggling and had asked about me again. I did not respond immediately. I sat with the information and examined my reaction. There was no anger, no urgency, no pull to fix anything, only distance. And that told me everything I needed to know. I replied politely but firmly, wishing them well, and asking not to be contacted again about family matters. The response never came. Later, I learned that my parents had finally accepted that the door was closed, not slammed, but locked with intention. That knowledge did not bring relief or sadness. It simply felt final. As time continued, I allowed myself to open new connections carefully. Friendships built on shared values, not shared history. I learned how to enjoy trust without surrendering boundaries, how to give without sacrificing self-respect. Occasionally, I thought about the past not as a wound, but as a reference point, a reminder of how easily loyalty can be mistaken for obligation. One evening, while reviewing long-term plans, I realized that my definition of success had changed completely. It was no longer measured by numbers or recognition. It was measured by peace, by the ability to end a day without unresolved tension, by knowing that the people around me were there by choice, not convenience. And in that understanding, I saw the final shape of my story forming, not as a tragedy or a victory, but as a quiet resolution built over time, where loss turned into clarity and clarity into strength, and where the absence of certain people made room for a life that finally felt whole. The last lesson came without warning and without drama. One ordinary morning, I received a message from an unknown number that contained no explanation, only a short apology. I knew who it was without asking. My brother. There was no request attached. No justification, no attempt to reopen the past, just acknowledgement. I stared at the screen for a long time and then deleted the message without replying. Not because it was too late, but because some chapters are complete even when apologies arrive. That moment felt like the true ending. Not because everything was forgiven or fixed, but because nothing else needed to be said. I continued living the life I had built quietly and intentionally. The business ran smoothly, the people around me were steady, and my days no longer carried the weight of unresolved expectation. I understood then that betrayal did not define me, and neither did success. What defined me was the choice to walk away without becoming bitter, to protect what I built without destroying myself in the process. My family remained part of my history, but no longer part of my direction, and that distinction changed everything. Looking back, I realized that intelligence and hard work helped me survive, but clarity is what allowed me to move forward, the ability to see people as they are, not as I hoped they would be, and to accept that love without respect is not love at all. My story did not end with revenge or reconciliation. It ended with balance, with a life that belonged fully to me. And that was the quiet victory no one else needed to witness.